Home stretch here. Last question is security's impacts on your work life. Now, people love this question. They don't want to stop talking. It's very exciting. You know, I'm really excited for Soraya is to see this CXO council that you have. Well, you can handle it. Come on. What, can we have a mic up here real quick? Just give us like a thumbnail of what's going to happen at about 11:15. And you're, yeah, here you go. Tell everybody. Don't just tell me.
But you're going to ruin the surprise.
Well, I'm not telling you to give them all the answers. Just give us.
We were going to ask questions. No, I'm just kidding.
Give us.
No, we're going to have a. We're going to have a.
Tell us the compelling story about why people should stay and hear what you're going to do in a half hour or so.
The reason you should all stay is because I'm moderating a panel.
Yeah, that's what I knew was coming. Why did I not know that was coming?
No, all kidding aside, we have an outstanding panel, and we're going to talk about innovations in procurement. So we're actually going to talk about what we're doing differently in the procurement process to be more innovative and get our acquisitions done in a more effective, efficient manner. Many of us have been working on this for the last couple of years. It's not about just changing policy and procedure, but it's actually putting it into practice. And I'm really excited about the panel we have because they have some great ideas that they're going to share with you. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be interesting. And besides that, like I said, I'm moderating the panel.
Yeah. That's about a half hour from now, and there's a coffee break in between. So how can you lose? Right. Free lunch afterwards, so that's beautiful. All right, security. We've got A, B, and C, or you can just share what's going on in what has gone on in the tables that you have been involved with. Who wants to go? Is that for now, sir? Are you nominating someone, or are you speaking yourself? Now, you can't point unless that person really wants to be called on.
We're nominating our oldest millennial.
Zach, Zach, are you doing this willingly, or are you just being a good sport?
I'm being a good sport.
All right, that's kind of what I suspected.
I made a comment at the end that is actually not the beginning. So we talked about all three. We've all been hacked. Our data's out there. So in terms of the now what, one cool idea that one of our table mates said was, well, you know, there's always more data getting out there, and you can't undo that. But what you can do is you can change the things you use to authenticate. So in the financial sector, they talk about out-of-wallet information. Well, when the wallet changes and when what's out there changes, then we change. And that doesn't mean that's something that the government does by itself. We leverage what's going in the private sector. Two-step validation, it's a great thing. They call your phone. It's the old dial back for those of us who are old enough to remember that. It works today, may not work in the future, but as the industry comes up with these things, we need to leverage what's available, and as what's in the wallet changes, we find what industry has moved to in terms of out of the wallet. And that means that biometrics may get compromised, but maybe there's another trick. So we'll leverage that. When there's a special nation state deal, then maybe the government invests in that and we keep that quiet. Security baked into your everyday life, we didn't actually talk a lot about that, but we did talk about, do you feel safe at work? And this general trust that what we have may work, but there's some concern, maybe I expressed it, about all the information that people put out there in social media. And maybe it's because I know too much, but when I look at our directory, when I look at web pages and see people using websites, public websites as collaboration mechanisms, I think, oh my gosh, here's a phishing attack waiting to happen. So that's something that keeps me awake. And then the other thing this is how I got roped into this. We were making jokes about burying data and physically locating, and you know, you can't secure it. You can't keep it to yourself. That's not going to make it more secure. And so we had a good discussion about cloud and leveraging even private clouds operated by the private sector, because the private sector has the resources to hire and train people who know this stuff better than the government does when we do it with government employees internally. So the key is not necessarily to have a public cloud, but have either a private, it's about how many tenants you have, either private or public, but don't try to do it as a government entity. Do it leveraging the expertise and power of the private sector, be it single or multiple tenant. And then the last thing that I railed on, which is how I got handed the microphone, was I said, okay, we're all making jokes about hiding data. And of course, you really, putting it 100 miles down might be cool for EMP protection, but won't do much else. And I said, well, you know something? We actually don't ask the question of whether something should be on the internet. Things don't always have to be exposed. What was the PII doing that was accessible, that was leaked from OPM? Why was a contractor able to dial in to maintain that database remotely? Why? Do we think about that? So rather than assume that cloud is the answer and internet, and it's always securing about the internet, let's do the basics. Ask that question first. Does it need to be accessible from outside, from a non-private network? And if the answer is no, don't do it. Ask that architecture question. You won't find that in the hundreds of controls that are listed. Well, you will, but it doesn't say that. It's something we should ask. And that's how I got handed the mic.
Well, and it always starts with a joke, doesn't it? Trouble always begins by somebody
like
trying
that.
to be funny,
I started
right,
a
Zach?
joke, right, yeah.
Thank you very much. That's great insight. Harold, right here. Again, you're volunteering someone else instead of...
I never do the work.
Yes, give it to him.
So Joshua's new in his position at AMS as acting director of cybersecurity, so the question was really good, and I'll turn it over to the expert.
Yeah, drafting someone else as...
Throw on the mic again. We should drop it next time.
Sorry about that. Wasn't my idea.
So the quick relation to this is I have a 16-year-old daughter that we've been teaching to drive for a long time, and we get into the car, automatic transmission. There's 2 pedals on the floor. She has 2 feet. Both feet go on the pedals. So cybersecurity is often reviewed as the brakes in the car. So we're the initial stiff arm whenever you bring up a new product. So how do you bake security into everyday work life? We tried to discuss that, and it came up to make sure that, or to address it initially in your applications development. And so an easy way to do this is to take your operational test and evaluation and loop them into your agile processes if you're using agile processes, and make sure that they're part of that continuous feedback from the beginning to the end. So right now my daughter's got both feet on the pedals, the engine is screaming, but we're both freaking out in the car at the same time because we're really not going anywhere, but there's a lot of discussion back and forth.
Yeah, I bet. Discussion is a nice word for that, by the way.
So
having just taught a son to drive within the last 2 years,
right.
I get you.
And getting to that point where she's able to just use that one train of motion, that continuous feedback loop, and we're getting it in from the beginning to the end, not discussing it at the end. So she's able to use the brakes, tie it in. Use the brakes as the confidence that she can actually reach for the gas and move the car forward and move faster instead of just using the brake to stop the car. So making sure that you're tying that in from the beginning is definitely the key. So reaching out to your cybersecurity to include them into your process is not necessarily waiting for them to come to you, or waiting until the end and then holding your breath as you hand your baby over to cybersecurity to disassemble.
So let me ask you a question, since you've already been drafted, because you're at a position in your life that I think might tie back to something that Zach just mentioned a moment ago. And that is, you have a 16-year-old daughter, I have a 17-year-old son, and that concept of what should or shouldn't be on social media or on the web. How do we go about educating not just our kids, but our workforces about how somebody, often bad guys, are able to take data from hundreds maybe of different sources and lay it on top of each other to find information about us that maybe we don't even know somebody's able to put together? And I'm not asking you to give me an answer because I don't know that there is one, but I'm more raising it because I'm not sure that there's a lot of discussion about that right now.
No, it is tough, especially from an exposure standpoint, because I have 4 children and they are all Gen Zers. So even past the point of being millennials, and they've grown up in an environment where they don't understand a world without Google, let alone most of them don't even discuss the Dewey Decimal System in school. They go straight to the computer for 100% of their research. Their information is on the internet from birth. So I have nieces and nephews who had Facebook accounts before I did. So they won't know any better. So bringing this into a work environment where you have projects who are handling PII, or users in general who are handling PII, who don't understand that the risk involved with that is not necessarily from having it all compiled in one spot, but being able to aggregate data in general. So it's not just somebody's name or somebody's email address or somebody's or phone number, their home address, excuse me. So it's the aggregate of that, and just like sifting through somebody's garbage, they're able to pile these things together and quickly loop that together. So it is going to become more challenging as generations come up, because it's something that they are going to be numb to a degree, and then at that point they're not going to be as concerned about it. I think their fear in losing their personal identity at that point will probably much less than it is for us. Their privacy is not as big of a deal.
Well, and I think it's a completely different definition of what privacy is and what identity management is.
Right.
You know, my kid doesn't, I don't know that he even has an awareness that it matters, and I don't know that he has an awareness of whether he will have an identity to manage because of what the footprint that already exists about him out there. I'm sure the same thing's the case for your kids too.
For sure, and it's tough to tie that relation, or to relate that to them, whereas that now they're managing their own identity, whereas you take that into a work environment, it's tough to take and relate that to an Amazon, using Amazon as an example, where you're managing your PII, and they're when you get into a work environment, it's not your personal information that you're worried about losing, it's for agriculture, it's all of our customers that if I lose that, it's a huge hit to our reputation in general. And so it's trying to drive that in a way that, especially in civilian agencies where it's viewed that a lot of your information is public information. So there is a lot of sensitive information and classified or unclassified but sensitive information that you have to make sure you're accounting for in that kind of environment. So all of our information is public information. Definitely drives complacency, where you're going to bleed off a lot of information you're not accounting for.
Thanks for indulging my question. I appreciate that, because I think that's something that we don't think about from a citizen perspective either. 10 years from now, what's the citizen's expectation as far as what the government will be providing, protecting, and needing in order to provide services? So I appreciate you humoring me for a moment. We're going to come over here, and then we'll go to Steve at 12. Hi, how are you?
Hi. So we looked at this from several different perspectives, and one we focused on was cyber physical. And looking at this from, in the norm, we'll look at everything that's important, every piece of information that we put out there, we really attribute it to whether it's the cloud or whether we have locked down our passwords. It's all about cyber. So I had the pleasure, and may have worked with some of the folks in this room, with developing the cyber physical strategy for the Federal Protective Service, DHS. And the approach that we take is really not disconnecting the two. Everything that we create has a cyber component to it. So it's all about the cyber physical. For me, it's looking at the federal facilities that we protect and ensuring that every one of you in here and your families have an opportunity to access those facilities daily without harm. But we have to take it a step further, and that is not just looking at whether a bad actor can gain physical access to a facility and perform an active shooter scenario, but it's also looking at what happens if that bad actor really no longer has to increase their risk in gaining access physically to an entry point in a federal facility, but really accessing the industrial controls associated with that facility and bringing everyone out front. I mean, then you've placed everyone in a very compromising position, and the bad actor no longer has to gain access to that facility. So what we've also found in developing that strategy is that, employees within that federal space, you can see just how relaxed they are when it comes to protecting that environment, protecting the information, protecting access to those control systems, whether it's placing passwords on the door next to the HVAC room, or whether it is leaving their office doors open, as simple as that. But I've learned that we really just disconnecting the two, cyber and then physical security, is really one and the same. You have to always keep those two together, because if you develop and build something, there's always a cyber component to that. And if it's already built and we're looking for ways of building in efficiency, then there's a cyber component to that. We also talked a little bit about how can we do a better job, or at least bake this into everyday work life. Everyone is looking to gain a security clearance level at some point, and we're looking within DHS. I know within my own component is really, does everyone in the office need a TSSCI, or can we look at the actual access to the information, the amount of information that they need to access? Is there a need to know, and look at the position descriptions and say, everyone in the building, all 5,000 or however many, they don't really need a TSSCI, because then you begin to expose yourself to leaks and other things that may take place. So minimizing access to, or understanding what's the real need for a certain clearance level, that is equally as important. And also building in that the cyber hygiene requirements into policies, but also into your statement of works and your requirements. We are responsible for procuring technical countermeasures for federal facilities. Well, it's important for us to really look at what are we building into those statement of works, into those requirements, because when we look at the upgrades needed for systems and the push, security push, are we requiring the vendor or others to ensure that there are security upgrades pushed to those systems? And when we take a technical countermeasure out of a facility, are we sanitizing it, or are we leaving certain information on there that can allow the bad actor to rebuild that same system and gain access to those systems within our facilities and also within our homes? We often forget that the same process that we use at work for passwords and other things, that we need to look at how do we utilize that at home as we introduce Alexa and Google Dot and all those other things. That's efficiency, that's us wanting ease and comfort and flexibility, but it's also introducing certain risk and security risk into our home environment. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and we talked about here, is how do we educate our workforce on that. And I think it's connecting the dots between your home environment, your work environment, and understanding the importance of protecting it all. And we will not ever, in my lifetime, be able to totally wipe out a bad actor's ability to gain access, but what we can do is minimize the damage associated with that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. We wanted to go to Steve next at table 12. You've got the mic already.
I have.
You're prepared.
I have the mic. Yeah, so the conversation at our table had more people here a little while ago.
They were afraid you were going to call on them.
I love Dave, but it was really, there were more people here. Our conversation had kind of a nice tie-in to the conversation here at table 21. Not in that we were talking about how to manage teenagers or anything, but it all did sort of come back to the culture and ethic and the personal accountability associated with this. So we started our conversation by talking about B here in terms of how security's been baked into your everyday work life. And we talked a bit about the training that we now go through on sort of a regular annual basis at a lot of agencies. At GSA, we actually just went through that, where you go through a fairly rigorous training each year that helps inculcate everybody in the population with regards to your responsibilities, how to protect against phishing attacks and things of that nature. And among other things, one of the things that highlights is we can talk about all the technical aspects of security, but at the end of the day, it's the individuals that are really the weak point in the framework in a lot of respects. From there, we went and started talking about some articles last week about how the government responded to the WannaCry virus, including an article where Margie here was quoted, and the shift in how the government is poised and postured to respond to those kinds of threats today compared to how it was 3 years ago with the Heartbleed virus and things of that nature. And that kind of led to a final conclusion about sort of this change in ethic and the change in culture and the fact that it used to be when you talked about cybersecurity that it was really just those of us here in this room who really understood the danger and the severity of that threat. And today, when somebody says, hey, we've got a cyber threat, everybody from the executive down to the individual knows this is really serious. You need to drop everything and do something about it right now. And it reminded me that when I got into the federal space, 15, 16 years ago, I marveled at the way that in the defense and intelligence side of the House, people took so seriously the whole notion of security clearances and what that means and the behaviors associated with that. That it wasn't just a set of rules, it was actually a culture that was built around that. And it seems as though we're finally beginning to develop that on this side of the house, so to speak, and throughout the government as it relates to cyber. And I think that that's a very encouraging sign.
Steve, thanks for that. We have a couple of minutes more. If there's somebody, another table that wants to weigh in, or we can go to coffee. It sounds like the votes are for coffee. Guys, thank you for a terrific conversation. You made this very easy and fun and engaging. And the coffee is set up out in the hallway, so do that. Go get yourself juiced up, and then get back in here, and Soraya is about to really deliver on that promise that she just made. Thanks, everybody.